Hey look, it's another video on YouTube about the downfall of Bleach. How fucking original. Yeah, despite this topic being beaten to death more than my dick, Bleach is a special series to me as it was the first manga I ever read. Therefore my opinion on this topic is obviously more important than other people's. Bleach, written by Tite Kubo, was my favourite series for years, to the point where I was dangerously obsessed with it. And to this day I believe it started out as a genuine masterpiece of shonen at the time, but its potential was wasted, hence the fucking title of this video. I think most people in the highly esteemed anime community would agree that yes, Bleach became a shadow of its former self. A younger me, a rather strapping young lad, was originally obsessed with its original edginess, deeply emotional moments, and how do I put it? Overall scenes that make you want to have a big old nut. What a young me believed was this niche series no one at my school knew about was actually popular worldwide. Around 10 years ago, before we were treated to such fantastic modern anime game changers such as Black Clover, Berserk 2017, and this. Many people had to put up with mediocre shows like Death Note or Full Metal Alchemist, and of course Bleach. These had all acted as gateway shows because it targeted a teenage demographic with more mature themes and character personalities than the typical shonen series of the time. This is what I believe led to Bleach's initial popularity and high rankings in Weekly Shonen Jump, because unlike other shonen, it was one of those rare series that challenged the status quo at the time. This is what made the series so special, not just for me, but for many others. And unfortunately, this quality and consistency in its writing is something that it would lose in its later arcs. Bleach's manga currently boasts sales of 90 million tankobon copies sold, making it the 8th best-selling manga in Shueisha as of this video. Along with One Piece and Naruto, it was part of the Western-named Big Three, as it wasn't just popular in Japan, but popular worldwide. Throughout Bleach's 15 years of serialization, it gained huge international sales for both its manga and anime, the creation of 23 Bleach games, and even multiple theatrical musicals. The reason why I'm saying these facts is because having a story become this popular in the first place is a feat achieved by very few mangaka, and for Tite Kubo to create this series at such a young age makes him no less than a prodigy. Discussing the downfall of Bleach isn't really anything new in the community, and I want to stress that this video focuses more on actually objectively analysing why its story declined to the average viewer, why its sales decreased, and the issues affecting Tite Kubo himself, as I believe these are the three main factors into understanding why Bleach, in my opinion, was a wasted masterpiece. So it's a common argument people use in the anime community to say that Bleach became a dead series. Yeah, it's undeniable to say that Bleach lost its momentum compared to what it once was, but even towards the end of its run it was still selling millions of manga copies per year. Bleach went from a best-selling series in Japan to, well, a moderately well-selling series. If you look at the numbers, we can see the number of Bleach's manga sales back from 2008 when the series was early in the Arrancar saga to 2016 when the series ended. In 2008 there were 3.1 million manga volumes sold that year, making it the 5th best-selling manga. In 2009 its sales reached an all-time high of 6.4 million, making it the 3rd best-selling manga that year, just behind Naruto and One Piece. In 2010, 5.2 million volumes were sold, and so on and so on. The most noticeable drop in sales is in 2011 when the Arrancar arc concludes and the Full Ring arc begins. Here we see it goes down to 4.1 million volumes sold, then down to 2.9 million volumes sold in 2012, then to 2.7 million in 2013, then to 2.9 million in 2014, 2.8 million in 2015, and finally 2.2 million in 2016. Here what we see is that in Bleach's final year of serialization it had its lowest sales to date, with it selling almost a third of what it did during the Arrancar saga. And to be fair, no wonder the sales decreased. I mean, the average viewer was set up to believe that Ichigo defeating Aizen was the climax of the series. After that point in the story, Ichigo lost his powers, said farewell to Rukia, and Soul Reapers wouldn't be reintroduced into the story until a year later, so no wonder the average reader wasn't invested afterwards. Bleach's anime had ended in 2012, was barely getting marketed by Jump, and the main advertisement it was getting was really only from a mobile game. I'll only briefly go over the Shonen Jump rankings because I honestly don't believe they're that important in Bleach's case and are kind of ambiguous. The main premise of the ranking system in Jump is that generally the series that get more votes go to the front of the magazine, while series with less go to the back. However, comments from Oda state that the actual order is decided week to week by the editor-in-chief. Now, this shows that postcards do affect ranks, but it's mostly up to the editor himself. This is why I say the rankings are ambiguous and don't truly represent Bleach's overall popularity, as whilst it was getting low rankings, it was still selling way above a lot of series in Jump. If you look at the graph, it's correct that Bleach most likely got a lower amount of votes from the average Jump reader after 2011, as they weren't as excited by the story after Aizen's defeat, but the volume sales are completely unaffected by Jump's voting system. I think it's a decent way to understand the common reader opinion of the series at the time, but the actual way the series are ranked is still ambiguous, and unlike other videos, I don't believe it's the most accurate point of evidence to understand why Bleach lost its popularity. Bleach's anime was actually a ridiculously well-selling series, and looking at the numbers were surprising, as before researching I never saw them before. As a long-running franchise, it has 570,000 total units sold in Japan alone, with an average of 6,000 units sold per DVD volume. To put that into perspective, Fairy Tail has 24,000 units sold, and the entire Naruto franchise, including Naruto, Naruto Shippuden and Boruto combined, have 265,000 units sold, which is almost half of Bleach's DVD sales. The only series that can really compare to Bleach's anime is, well, One Piece and Gintama, with One Piece having 524,000 units sold and Gintama's anime having over 1 million total units sold. This makes Gintama the only shonen series whose DVD sales actually exceeds that of Bleach's in Japan. But in the end, it still followed a similar trend to its manga counterpart, with Bleach's DVD sales averaging well over 11,000 copies per month throughout the Soul Society arc, down to 7,000 copies in the Arrancar arc, and finally to around 2,000 copies in the Full Ring arc. Despite there being other factors at play that would reduce the anime sales, like the ridiculous amount of filler and anime being pirated more frequently, the anime still saw a massive drop in sales after Aizen's defeat, to where Bleach was selling almost a third of what it was in its prime. Now, it goes without saying that Bleach's anime ending in 2012 caused a massive blow to both Bleach's sales and relevance. Many people are only interested in watching Bleach's storyline if it's animated, and they simply don't want to read it in a manga format. I mean, I wonder if someone has, combined both factors of the manga and anime into a sort of motion manga thing. I think most can agree that Bleach performed very well from a sales point of view during its run, but I feel like the end of the series only sold as well as it did because of previous fans who bought volumes to either finish their manga collection or the people who actually enjoyed the story after Aizen's defeat, which was the minority. The fact that the story was set up in such a way to portray Ichigo defeating Aizen as the climax of the series is really what created less demand for Bleach's products as a whole after Aizen's defeat. If the anime and manga kept up its momentum in sales similar to what it had during the Soul Society arc, it would still be in the top 10 best-selling manga, would arguably still have higher rankings, and its anime would dominate the shonen market even more. This is why I'm saying Bleach had so much wasted potential. And yes, I am using the popularity equals quality argument, which isn't necessarily true in some cases, but just looking at the trends show a gradual decrease in sales after the Soul Society arc, and a sharp drop in sales when the Arrancar saga is concluded and we enter the Full Ring arc. These are the exact places in the story where, coincidentally, people say Bleach's quality went downhill. At this point in the story, it's obvious that domestically in Japan, Bleach lost its momentum in sales and rankings after the Arrancar saga. But even though I gave a long-winded explanation, I'm pretty sure most people have already come to the conclusion that yes, the average fan became less interested in Bleach after Aizen's defeat, and to an extent even after Soul Society. Of course, your personal enjoyment of the series is all down to personal preference. I mean, someone somewhere even enjoyed the fucking Bound arc. But I'm mainly talking about the average fan, and it's obvious that starting from 2011, there was less demand for Bleach's products, and an overall lower opinion of the series from domestic readers. The Arrancar saga started in chapter 188 of the manga and ended in chapter 423, which is a very fucking long time. If I put it like this, for years people invested in the Arrancar saga because new fan favourite characters like Ulquiorra and Grimmjow were introduced, people wanted to see the captains fight and how strong the new enemies were, and ultimately Aizen's master plan. I honestly believe Aizen was the glue that held the series together. He was Bleach's first proper long-term antagonist and drew lots of new fans into the series because, well, people liked his character. He was an intelligent, confident, overpowered and manipulative villain that people were actually interested in. This made him the driving force behind the overall plot of the story and made people excited to see the direction the story would go. After his defeat, that was all taken away. A large portion of the fanbase inevitably lost interest because, well, the main antagonist for hundreds of chapters was defeated. Ichigo lost his powers, he said farewell to Rukia, and there wasn't much left in the story that would keep the average fan interested. At least at the end of Soul Society arc, people were still interested in reading because of Aizen's introduction as a villain and his betrayal of Soul Society setting up the next arc. I mean, just look at this scene. If the villain can forceful break the main character's theme tune, then Kubo could have ended the series after Aizen's defeat, and I honestly believe there would have been less backlash over the ending than the ending we got in chapter 686. Some people in the anime community even argue Bleach's story peaked during the Soul Society arc. Actually, it's kind of more of a common public opinion that the Soul Society arc was the best arc in Bleach. Once again, it's all down to personal preference, and if you dislike Soul Society or if it's not your favourite part of the story, that's okay. You can enjoy the fucking Bound arc. It seems to be the common community opinion both domestically in Japan and overseas that Bleach reached its peak from a storytelling point of view in Soul Society. I mean, I even watched it recently and I can kind of understand why. So much detail went into world building, complex characters and their distinct interactions with other characters. It had a system of fighting with multiple layers and a conclusion that paid off extremely well. The only main criticism of the arc is that Ichigo powers up too quickly and wins unrealistic battles, but once you realise that his power is pretty much a hybrid of every conceivable race in Bleach's universe, it begins to make sense. Well, kinda, not really. There's no way Ichigo could have stopped the Sogyoku, which apparently has the power of 1,000,000 Zanpakuto after 3 days of training. Anyway, the main fact is that the Soul Society arc was the first time Bleach became a full-on battle shonen with a complete tone shift from the first arc, which was more of a monster of the week type setting. I'm not saying that the other arcs afterwards didn't have this depth in its writing. I mean, the most enjoyable arc for me was the 1,000-Year Blood War, but a lot of fans can really see where this turn in quality happened, where the story began to go downhill. After Soul Society, the main factors that kept people interested were, well, its cool character designs, battles, and Aizen, but that was about the extent of it. Bleach had lost its crucial intrigue and mystery it once had. A criticism of the Hueco Mundo arc was that it repeated the plot of Soul Society. Whilst there wasn't a massive tone shift and some similarities like Ichigo still having to beat enemies that progressively got stronger and rescuing another one of his female friends, I don't think the plot was recycled like many people say. The parallel of Orihime being captured just like Rukia was in the Soul Society was honestly more of a subplot created by the main plot. Her significance being captured in Hueco Mundo in the context of the story was nowhere near as important as when Rukia was captured. But I can understand why the average viewer would think that the plot was recycled, and to be honest, I kind of understand where Kubo was coming from. If the formula in Soul Society works, then I don't blame him for using it again. Actually, from an interview, Kubo even said that the Arrancar saga wasn't supposed to last as long as it was, and was actually extended by the editors because the Espada were popular characters. Is this why the quality dropped? This is actually most likely the reason why the arc faced pacing issues and more than anything, contributed to the warped perception that Ichigo fighting Aizen was the actual climax of the series. This shows a greater issue with Shonen Jump as a whole and the influence editors can have on a series, and in this case, I honestly believed it wasted a ton of potential Bleach had. Imagine if the Arrancar arc was shorter but kept the great moments that readers liked, but its main purpose was to be a relatively straightforward battle arc to set things up for the final arc and introduce mysteries, therefore keeping the intrigue. The story would have actually flowed from the Arrancar arc to future arcs as, well, first of all, people wouldn't have thought Aizen's defeat was the climax or the ending of the series, and secondly, there would still be aspects of the story to keep the readers invested into finding out what happens next. Then we go on to the Fullbring arc. I feel like so many people have discussed why they hated this arc. Me telling you why this arc was disliked is pretty much pointless. Personally, I thought this arc was great and a lot of fun, but it's obvious on why it's known as the worst arc of Bleach. Kubo removed all of the elements that made the story popular. People were accustomed to Soul Reapers, Aizen monologues, and overpowered fights that no wonder people were less excited to read the manga anymore. The only way Kubo could have pulled this arc off is if it had more elements of what made the story popular to the average reader in the first place. So it's obvious why people reading or watching it would have found it less interesting, as there was hardly any substance to keep the average reader invested in the story. To me, it seemed like the Fullbring arc was a massive risk that didn't work, as it was too big of a tone shift and barely had any of the things that kept Bleach interesting or enjoyable, which is why there was so much wasted potential. Then we go on to the final arc, my personal favourite arc out of Bleach, the 1,000-Year Blood War. I feel like up until the ending, it has the most polarised opinion on its actual quality. The first half of the arc was commonly known as the arc where shit actually happens. It seemed like a pretty big tone shift from the Fullbring arc and started out pretty dark. Overall, the fan reactions seemed positive as we were back in Soul Society and the Ghost Nazis helped implement darker themes shown in the story. Questions fans have been asking for years were actually getting answered. The Ghost Nazis' first brutal invasion led to the first major character deaths in the series. Chojuro was killed, Soul Society was destroyed, the Captain Commander was killed, Unohana was killed, Byakuya should have been killed, Kenpachi was almost killed by Yuha, Ichigo's Bankai was broken in half. Bleach was entering a much darker territory that was actually bringing back the things people loved about the story. However, in usual Kubo fashion, the arc's potential was wasted. Throughout the series, Kubo has a tendency to introduce characters and themes with large amounts of personality and potential, but his actual execution of these ideas falls short. It was a similar case to the Arrancar saga where, despite it having a fantastic start with the introduction of Arrancars, a lot of parts seemed lackluster and empty, the pacing issues had become glaringly obvious, and big events weren't executed as well as they could have been. I think the biggest issue people had with the climax of the final arc was that more questions were left unanswered than not. The final fight only lasted 2 chapters, Yuha lost his initial impact as a villain he had at the beginning of the arc, and his defeat was, well, lazily written to say the very least. There was an abundance of plot inconsistencies as barely anything was wrapped up, and this is coming from someone whose favourite arc in Bleach is this arc, so I can't even imagine the disappointment other people felt at the time. At least the conclusions of other arcs were at the very least satisfying. It's surprising how, when you look back at the story, each arc ends with some insight into Ichigo's thoughts. At the end of Soul Society, something's obviously changed in his life forever and he knows it. You can infer from his inner monologue that the rain in his heart that's been pouring down ever since his mother died has finally been cleared away. At the end of the Arrancar saga, Ichigo shows us a more quiet, introspective side and displays insight and empathy for someone he should really hate, until after reflection, he finally accepts the loss of his powers. At the end of the Fullbring arc, Ichigo shows a sense of empathy when insisting on a proper burial for Ginjo, showing his inner strength. This point is even highlighted by Ukitake and Shunsui when they comment on how much he's matured. All these moments give Ichigo's character some definition that is crucial in giving closure to the story. But the ending of the 1,000-Year Blood War never gives us a chance to reflect like this. Ichigo defeats Yuha, has aged 10 years after the time skip, has a kid, and the classic shonen dad time skip haircut. That's all we get. We only really get an outside perspective of Ichigo, but we don't see any sort of emotional growth on the inside. We just get a cliche happy ending, which, to be fair, was in fact the ending Tite Kubo initially hoped for when he started the series. When I said Tite Kubo was a prodigy, I seriously meant it. He's someone who's been actively drawing manga since a young age and started working with Jump when he was in high school. For his first one-shot, he entered a contest for Jump, and despite not winning, he was talented enough to get to the final round and have an editor from Jump work with him. He then started his first serialized work at Jump with Zombie Powder at the ripe old age of 21 years old. And despite it being a relatively short series, it's definitely something I'd recommend you check out if you've already read Bleach. In 2001, at the age of 23, Kubo started Bleach and kept that series running in Jump for 15 years. At the age of 23, Kubo already had 2 one-shots and 2 serialized series in Jump, one of which would be one of their most successful long-running shonen. In other words, the dude's a fucking prodigy. The most interesting thing I find is that Kubo had Bleach's end in mind since the very beginning, and always envisioned it to be a sort of passing on the focus to the next generation sort of thing. From interviews, it's been stated the entire 15 years it lasted, Kubo was never bored of writing Bleach, and the only difficulties arrived when his health started declining. A lot of people know how intense the lifestyle of being a weekly manga author is, and towards the end of Bleach, rather than feeling a sense of accomplishment, Kubo simply thought, I'm tired. There were even times when he would think, I want to stop this here, but continued anyway because he was dedicated to finish the series. So yes, Bleach's potential was wasted. There are some factors that were partly Jump's fault for this, like extending the Arrancar arc and setting up Ichigo fighting Aizen to be the climax of the series, or more unfortunate factors like Kubo's declining health, which I believe was the main contributor to the rushed conclusion in chapter 686. However, I do think the claim that Bleach's rushed ending was entirely due to Jump is a baseless claim. Kubo stated that he's had good relationships with his editors throughout the 15 years of Bleach, and I honestly don't believe Jump specifically ended Bleach prematurely. If you're anything like me, where you've been watching the series since a young age, it's deniable that Bleach has had some sort of impact. I feel like for many years it's had a notoriously bad reputation, but many of the same people who criticize it now genuinely enjoyed it when the series began. The long-term future of Bleach is still uncertain, with the most anticipated thought being if the anime will ever return, which, if it does, I'll be the first one to watch. Anyways, that's about it. If you've watched this to the end and actually enjoyed what you've seen and heard, then consider subscribing to the channel. I know you've heard this countless of times and I do cringe every time I fucking hear it, but give the video a like if you enjoyed it. I'm a new channel and could really do with the support. Thanks so much for watching and delightful.